everybody, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar presentation by Dr. Aubyn. This is the first webinar presentation for this academic year, and we're very excited to have Dr. Festus Kofi Aubyn presenting with us today. So for now, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Festus Kofi Aubyn, who is going to present today on the topic, Understanding the Drivers and Dynamics of Violent Extremism in West Africa Coastal States. Dr. Aubyn is the head and regional coordinator for research and capacity building at the West Africa Network for Peace Building. He is a senior researcher and a lecturer focusing on conflict and security management, terrorism, violent extremism, peace building, and peace operations. He's the regional coordinator for WANEP, based in Accra in Ghana, and we're very honored to have him speak today on, as I mentioned, violent extremism in the coastal states of West Africa. So without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Aubyn, and after that we will hear from Assistant Professor Dr. Nancy Annan, who will be a discussant. So I will give you the floor, Dr. Aubyn.
So let me start by first of all thanking the Center for the invitation to do this presentation, and especially to Dr. Nancy, who led this effort. So as has been stated already, I'm going to present on the drivers and dynamics of violent extremism in West African coastal states. If you look at the African continent today, West Africa is one of the areas that has received a lot of attention in the international media and also at the local level because of what is happening with respect to military coups and issues around violent extremism within the continent. So this morning, I'm going to look at a general overview of violent extremism in the coastal states along the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa, look at some of the vulnerabilities and the drivers of violent extremism in these coastal states. Specifically, I will focus on Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Cote d'Ivoire, and also look at what has been done in terms of preventing and countering violent extremism in these coastal states, and look at some of the gaps and challenges, as well as some of the risk factors that could lead to the expansion of violent extremism within these coastal states. And then I'll conclude with some policy recommendations. So West Africa, especially the Sahel region, is one of the places that has been confronted with this violent extremist threats. If you look at 2013, when the political crisis in Mali started after the fallout of the NATO intervention in Libya, violent extremism was basically limited to the northern part of Mali, specifically in Timbuktu, Gao, Kidal. But over time, we've seen the gradual expansion of these violent extremist groups to new areas like Burkina Faso, Niger, and also we've seen the gradual expansion in the Lake Chad Basin, where we have Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria. And despite the international response, despite the intervention by the G5 Sahel, by the Operation Bakan, and all the other international counterterrorism operation, we've seen a gradual expansion of violent extremism to the coastal areas in West Africa. And so when you look at the statistics from 2019 up to 2022, in 2019, 2020, 2021, according to the statistics from the WANEP, West African Network for Peace Building Early Warning System, which is also linked to the African Union and also ECOWAS Early Warning System. If you look at the number of incidents that happened from 2019 to 2022, you could see a gradual increase in the number of incidents and also the countries that have been affected by violent extremism. So if you look at 2021, for example, we had 932 incidents according to the early warning data. But in 2022, we had almost 1,600. That shows a gradual increase in the number of attacks and also the countries that are affected. Between January and June this year, we've had a number of incidents across the region. And if you look at the statistics here, you will see that Burkina Faso has recorded the highest number of incidents, followed by Nigeria and also Mali and Niger. If you compare, you see that Niger has fairly fared well as compared to Mali and Burkina Faso. And these are the areas that are also being confronted by military coups and unconstitutional changes of government. But if you look at the coastal state, you see Benin and Togo, which has also recorded some number of attacks within the past six months. And although in Nigeria, we saw a decline in number of attacks as compared to 2022, I mean, we've also seen some attacks by Boko Haram and ISWAP in the region. Now, if you come to the coastal areas, you will see that there has been a gradual spillover effect from neighboring Sahel region. And most of the groups that are behind these attacks are the Jenim and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. They have mostly been involved in the attacks that have occurred in Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo over the past 2 to 3 years. And if you look at Benin, for example, you see attacks from Burkina Faso and also from Niger. But mostly Burkina Faso has been the launching pad for most of these violent extremist groups against the coastal areas. And most of these attacks have been perceived as mainly external, but there are also local dynamics that are fueling these attacks. So one will ask, why the focus on the coastal state? Why do violent extremists or terrorists want to focus on the coastal state? There are a number of factors, but I want us to look at 4. Generally, I mean, one of the things that push most of these violent extremists to seek other territories in the coastal areas is the counterterrorism operations that was ongoing in the Sahel by the G5 Sahel and also by the French Operation Barkhane and also the national counterterrorism efforts. The pressure on them forced most of them to move towards the coastal state. But more importantly, most of these groups are moving because, one, they want to control most of the key routes where smuggling and transnational organized crime take place. And so a lot of them are moving towards the south because they want to secure some of the trading route and the smuggling route to secure their lines of supply, such as food, equipment, fuel, motorcycles, and fertilizers, which are mostly used in producing explosives or IEDs. Some are also moving because they want to access markets for selling illegally obtained commodities like cattle and also gold. When they get them in the Sahel, they come and sell them in markets around the northern part of the coastal countries. And more importantly, recruitment is also one of the main reasons why they are moving. When they come to most of the northern communities, what they do is that they exploit local grievances to recruit more people, more young men, and sometimes forcefully conscript most of these young men to join their ranks. And then lastly, it's also part of the strategy to prevent the concentration of military operations. That is to overstretch the counterterrorism operations that are ongoing within the region in such a way that whilst states are trying to deal with the Sahel menace, others will also have to deal with those at the coastal areas and also the Lake Chad basin. So what it means is that attack everywhere, warrant protection everywhere. And when that happens, it depletes the resources of the state actors and the international actors. So it's part of the strategy to prevent the concentration of military forces. So I'll go into the drivers, looking at the 4 different countries. So we'll start with Cote d'Ivoire. In Cote d'Ivoire, the first major terror attack was in Grand Bassam in 2016, which was committed by the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, now part of Benin, in 2016. And since that attack, the northern part of Cote d'Ivoire, bordering Burkina Faso, has become the main area targeted by these violent extremist groups. So when you look at the map on the right side, you will see some of the hotspots of these attacks bordering Burkina Faso and also Cote d'Ivoire. And there are a number of vulnerabilities that is fueling these attacks, which are common across the 4 coastal areas, but also there are local dynamics specific to country context. So one of the reasons which I think cut across the countries is the recurring conflict between herders and farmers. And most of these herders are mostly from the Fulani population, who are often seen as marginalized in most of the communities and discriminated against. And so most of these terror groups exploit these local grievances to pursue their agenda. There are also resentment by former or ex-combatants who participated in the civil war in Cote d'Ivoire, who were never well reintegrated and never given other opportunities that others had during the DDR process within the country. And so there are a number of them who are being exploited by these extremist groups against the government. Then we have social and political marginalization, where some groups feel marginalized socially and politically. And this has also led to underdevelopment in a lot of these areas where these attacks are happening. And we have governance issues, socioeconomic challenges, and issues of weak border control or porous borders. In Benin, Benin had its first attack in northern Benin, the Panjari National Park, which is a tri-border region or forest area between Benin, Niger, and Burkina Faso. It's one of the areas that have been affected by these violent extremist attacks. And in May 2023, it had its major attack that killed about 15 people within the same region. If you look at the map also, you will see the Atakra region and the Alibori region. These are the regions in the northern part of Benin that are high-risk areas, because that is where most of these groups target, and it's also bordering neighboring Burkina Faso. And civilians, defense forces are the most attacked, and park rangers who protect these natural ecosystem. And because of the nature of the park, there are a lot of illicit crime that is happening within the Panjari and the W park. where violent extremists engage in all sorts of smuggling and illicit operations to finance their operations. There are kidnapping, there are robberies, there are thefts of motorcycles, there are thefts of livestock which they sell in other markets further south, fuel smuggling, illegal hunting, and drug trafficking that goes on within the park. Because of weak state presence, they take advantage of that to engage in all these illicit activities. And that is what they use to fund their activities in the Sahel and also within the coastal areas. And in terms of the drivers, we have transhuman conflict between farmers and herdsmen within the region. We have community grievances over privatization of the park because it serves as a source of livelihood for a number of local people. But the government privatized the park by giving it to a South African company called African Parks to take control over the park and manage it. And that has prevented the usage of the park by the local communities for farming and also for hunting and also for herding. And that has created a lot of grievances which have been exploited by these violent extremist groups. Then we have the governance issues, socioeconomic issues of unemployment, poverty. We have weak state presence, and we also have artisanal mining, which is happening in this park, which is being exploited by these groups, as well as the porous borders. Then we have Togo. Togo also had its first incidents in 2021, November, when a security post was attacked in the border village of Sanloga. And it's also in the southern region, which is a border with Burkina Faso. So you could see that most of the attacks are coming from groups located around Burkina Faso and Niger. And there as well, we have similar issues of poor governance, corruption, weak institutions, poverty, unemployment, inequalities, and illiteracy and other, which are being exploited by these groups to pursue their agenda in these countries. Now, Ghana is the only coastal country that is yet to be attacked by any violent extremist groups. And if you look at the map of Ghana, you will see that the areas that are most vulnerable to these attacks are the 5 northern regions: Upper West, Upper East, Northeast, Savannah, and then the northern region. These are the most vulnerable areas. Ghana has not been attacked because there are a number of perceptions that it has not been attacked because a lot of these violent extremists use it as a safe haven. When they are facing a lot of pressure from the Sahel, they come and hide and then go back. But there are a lot of resilience factors that explains why Ghana has not faced some of these challenges that its neighboring countries are facing. One will talk about the issues around, one, Ghana's democratic credentials. I mean, if you look at the democratic trajectory of the country since 1992, when it transitioned to multi-party democracy, we've had a peaceful, relatively peaceful transition of power between incumbent and opposition parties. And Ghana has not faced some of the challenges that its neighbors like Cote d'Ivoire, like Togo, have faced over the years. So the democratic credentials of the country has been one of our resilient factors. We also have interfaith dialogue and cooperation. The 3 main religions in Ghana, Muslim, Christianity, and traditional religion, have this practice of cooperation and dialogue whenever there are issues, to the extent that they even participate in each other's major festivities. So for example, in 2019, the National Chief Imam of Ghana, for example, celebrated his 100 years in the Catholic Church in Ghana. And that showed the level of cooperation between these religious groupings. There are challenges, but they are not challenges that has translated into a full-blown national issues. But there's a lot of interfaith cooperation between Christians and Muslims, which you don't find in other places. Ethnic tolerance and a general culture of peace. Ghana is a multi-ethnic society with different ethnic groups. There are intermarriages and there are cooperation among different ethnic groups, despite the inter and intra conflict that we've experienced over the years. There's generally tolerance of people towards other cultures within the country. And that has also prevented exploitation by any violent extremist groups. Then we have the role of the National Peace Council. The National Peace Council is made up of religious groups like Christians, Muslims, traditional religion, civil society, private sector, business community, and they are mostly in charge of conflict resolution and conflict transformation. And they use dialogue, negotiation, mediation to deal with any issues that come up. They exist at the local level, the national level, and the regional level. And they've been quite instrumental in terms of promoting peaceful coexistence, promoting peaceful resolution of conflict, and also addressing any issues that could become a major national crisis. Then we have the security measures also put in place by the states. Unlike most countries, Ghana has developed a counterterrorism framework that is currently implementing. And there are a lot of new reforms, creation of new units that are helping to deal with this threat. But one major thing that the security agencies have done is the use of the non-kinetic approach in preventing any spillover effect from neighboring countries or from terrorists exploiting the situation. So they've been building boreholes, construction of roads, bridges, and providing certain services to local communities, which are often exploited by these violent extremist groups. Of course, we have a vibrant media and an active civil society, which you don't find in most of the other countries. However, there are also certain vulnerabilities within the context of Ghana. We have the Boko conflict, which is close to the border with Burkina Faso, which is unresolved and could become an avenue for exploitation by these violent extremist groups. We also have the farmer-herder conflict that is being experienced in other places that have been affected by the threat. And mostly it involved the Fulani population or the Fulbe population, which is a major challenge across the region. Then state presence and capacity is also a bit weak in certain areas, issues of marginalization, socioeconomic challenges. And then there's also this issue of returnees from Libya who have participated in terrorist activities and violent extremist activities coming back home, and the fear of homegrown terrorism if care is not taken. And of course, we also have this issue about illegal mining and artisanal mining, which is often exploited by these violent extremist groups to raise funds to continue their operation. In terms of responses, there have been national response and regional responses. Within the coastal areas, we have the Accra Initiative, which was launched by Ghana, Togo, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and Burkina Faso in 2017 to share intelligence and conduct joint operations. But over time, Mali and Niger also joined. And I think Nigeria is also considering joining. And basically, they conduct joint military operations across the border areas and also share intelligence. And since the launch of the Accra Initiative, there are a lot of suspected terrorists or extremists that have been arrested, some prosecuted, and others in jail. We also have the state security measures where a lot of states have done a lot of reforms by deploying defense and security forces to vulnerable communities and vulnerable areas, building the capacity of state forces, because this is, for most countries, this is a new area. And so they need to build the capacity of the state forces. And in Togo, for example, there was almost a 1-year declaration of state emergency in the southern region, just to allow the security agencies to deal with the threats, curfews, banning of motorbikes and all that. There are also legislation and regulatory frameworks where there have been passage of new anti-terrorism laws, and then prosecution of also arrested suspects. So for example, those who participated in the Grand Bassam attack in Cote d'Ivoire, some of them were caught and prosecuted. Then we have creation of new agencies and units to tackle terrorism and violent extremism within the police, within the military, and also within the national security architecture. Some countries are also implementing socioeconomic resilient projects in vulnerable areas, such as building health centers, building boreholes for water, building roads, and dealing with some of the socioeconomic challenges that are often exploited by these violent extremist groups. There are also ongoing community engagements around the border areas, which for so many years have lacked a lot of state presence, to promote peaceful coexistence and also to prevent any support for these violent extremists. And then, of course, the role of civil society, who have also begun engaging in capacity building intervention, sensitization, and humanitarian assistance to vulnerable areas. In terms of gaps, one of the gaps with these responses is that it's been militarized. That is, it's been more military-centered, with limited involvement of civilian actors and local communities. We all know that the military is not trained to deal with the root causes of this problem, which are governance, socioeconomic issues, cultural issues. But most of the intervention have focused on the military, with the limited involvement of the civilian actors and local communities, who are best placed in terms of addressing the root causes of this problem. There are funding challenges, logistical challenges, technological challenges. If you look at most of the border areas, these are large areas, areas where you have no government institutions. And therefore, there is this idea that drones, for example, could be deployed to man some of these areas. But a lot of the countries lack these resources. Most of the funding going into counterterrorism is mostly coming from donor partners and bilateral partners like the European Union, the United States, and other countries. In terms of risk, one of the major risks that could lead to further expansion of violent extremist groups in the region is the military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These are the epicenter of violent extremism in the region, especially Niger. And now that there is political crisis in this country, it's really impacting counterterrorism efforts across the region, because they lack adequate presence and the support needed to protect their territories and to prevent the spillover to neighboring countries. And what is even more worrying is the threat by ECOWAS to use force in Niger if the military don't hand over power to President Bazoum. And if that happens, it may further even worsen the situation and affect CVE efforts within the region. The other is also the withdrawal of Western counterterrorism operation, Barkhane, Takuba, the EU missions that were operating in Mali, Burkina Faso, and currently in Niger. Although there are a lot of criticisms against these Western counterterrorism operations, to a large extent, they've also provided some kind of support to state actors in terms of preventing the threat. And as they leave, there's a huge vacuum that has been created that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, we are going to see a further consolidation and expansion of these groups. But what this is also producing is the geopolitical rivalries and competitions between the Western countries and also Russia on one hand, where you see a shifting alliance, strategic alliance towards Russia by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, following the coups in those countries because of the criticisms against France's engagement in the political, economic spheres in these countries. And we've also seen the entrance of the Russian Wagner group that has been implicated in a lot of human rights issues. But the issue is that if these rivalries continue, the kind of cooperation and consensus at the multilateral level that we need to deal with this threat will be weakened. And that could affect the containment of these threats against the coastal straits. So by way of recommendation, I think one of the major issues that has caused most of the coups we see within the region is issues of democratic governance. People questioning liberal democracy, whether it's the best form of governance within the region or not. But some of the research that we have done actually demonstrate that people think democratic governance is the best form of governance, but how it is practiced within the various countries is where the problem is. And the practice is also informed by the kind of constitution that they have, which gives the executive arm of government a lot of power, to control almost everything within the country. And so there's a need for constitutional reforms where people become the center of governance, where there's improved relation between state and society to ensure that the people become the center and the focus of governance within the region. Then we need a comprehensive approach that combines both military and non-military responses to ensure that the root causes of violent extremism is addressed, which is issues of socioeconomic development, issues of good governance, issues of unemployment, issues of poverty. Without a combined comprehensive approach, it may be difficult to deal with these dimensions. CSOs and local communities must be actively involved in national and regional responses, not only in the implementation stage, but even in the conceptualization, design, and development of those interventions to ensure that there's local ownership and to ensure their active role in dealing with the threats. And with the withdrawal of all these Western partners, it is time also for ECOWAS, which is the regional body, to take a more active role in coordinating regional responses to violent extremist threats with the support of AU, UN, and other partners. Because for the past decade, its role has been overshadowed by all these multilateral counterterrorism efforts within the region. And now that most of them are withdrawing, it is important that it takes the active role in coordinating responses. In conclusion, the risk of further expansion of violent extremism is high in the coastal areas due to the state fragilities and also the ongoing democratic backsliding. Almost every country within the region, especially in the coastal areas, people are even, in some places, people are calling for coup because of what is happening within those countries following, especially after COVID-19 and the kind of stress it brought on economies in those countries. And so the risk of expansion is very high. And it is important that due to the nature and the dynamics of the threats, we have both national and regional responses in addressing the threat in a well-coordinated manner to ensure that the threat, the root causes and other factors that continue to fuel violent extremism is addressed. I will pause here, and then during the question and answer time, I can throw more light on some of the issues I've raised. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aubyn, for an extremely interesting presentation.